I'm Jonathan Shaw, founder of Decoding Pain, and in this video I want to ask you, do you have the right diagnosis? Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is a lot of people come to me and they're suffering in pain, and often one of the reasons they're suffering is because they've been given the wrong diagnosis. They've been diagnosed incorrectly by the person they've gone to see, whether that's the doctor or the chiropractor or the physio or the massage therapist. Whoever they've been to see has misdiagnosed them. I'm going to give you an example of this. Now, before I give you an example, I want you to understand how important it is that you get a good diagnosis. It is the most crucial stage in solving chronic pain, because if you don't get a good diagnosis, then everything that follows, the therapy, the treatments, the people you see, the amount of money you spend, the amount of time you put into it, the energy you invest into it, kind of stems off of the diagnosis. So I'll give you a couple of examples of how a poor diagnosis can keep you stuck in pain for a really long period of time, and how a good diagnosis can get you out of pain very, very quickly. So one of my clients came to me about a year ago now, and she'd had foot pain for about a year, I believe, if I'm correct. If I'm remembering correct, it was about a year. And she'd been diagnosed finally, after all that time, with CRPS, chronic regional pain syndrome. And obviously the doctors couldn't do anything about that. Now, she'd been through a year of pain, and she'd been going around in circles, and then she was given this diagnosis and just left, because obviously traditional medicine cannot do anything about that problem, and except medicate you and just kind of control it. Now, I've treated CRPS, and I've treated it very successfully and got rid of it for somebody. So this lady came to me with this pain in her foot, believing that's what it was, but she was recommended to me to see if there's anything I could do. When I looked at her foot and I examined her and I asked her a few questions, I realised she actually did not have CRPS. What she had was something that made it look like she had CRPS. In reality, what she had was a very tight tendon on the bottom of her foot, which was creating the same type of symptoms. And she also had a shock, a biological stress, that was causing it to look like she had the same symptoms. And as soon as I solved those two things, all of the pain went away. And it went away in about 4 weeks. It was very, very quick. And she'd had the pain for at least a year, basically because she'd had poor diagnosis. And the final diagnosis she had was completely wrong. It wasn't the right one. Now, if I'd followed that diagnosis, I wouldn't be able to solve her pain. But because I looked at it differently, because I followed my model of how pain works and what causes pain, I was able to treat that very easily and get rid of pain very, very quickly. Because that's what this is all about. That's what decoding pain is about. It's helping you get rid of your pain. I don't believe anyone should suffer in pain, and so the diagnosis is very, very important. I'll give you another example from a client who came to me recently, and this is an old client who came to me with a problem many years ago, and we solved that problem. And he gave me a call a couple of weeks ago and said, I woke up the other day with ringing in my ears, and feeling quite rough and run down, and I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, I've got a virus, I've got an infection, and gave me antibiotics, and told me the ringing might never go away. Now, he'd only just woken up with this. It only just come on. It was very loud, and he had it for about a week, and he couldn't handle it any longer. And he said, is there anything I can do? I asked him a couple of questions over the phone, and I realised I had a good idea what it was that was causing the problem. So he came to me. Now, bear in mind, his diagnosis was he had an infection, which he'd been given antibiotics for, and he'd also been told the ringing might never go away. And I'm quite sure a lot of people have been told exactly the same thing from waking up with this symptom. The only difference here is that he called me and didn't necessarily trust the doctor that he was seeing. So I looked at him and realised he'd actually just trapped a nerve in his neck. What this meant was that he's actually a carpet fitter, and because of his job, he was carrying heavy carpet. He jolted his neck, which had pulled a muscle and caused him to trap a nerve in the left side of his neck. But it also caused him to tip his head to one side, like this. So he was walking around like this. What this does is this knocks out the little bones within the ear and cause them to be out of place. And when that happens, you can get all kinds of balance or ear problems. And in this case, it was causing a ringing in his ears, because the vibration of the sound wasn't flowing through correctly because his bones were not sitting correctly. So all I did was I released the nerve, I taught him to put his neck straight, and I worked the muscles, and eventually over a few weeks calmed the bones, the inner ear bones down, stabilised them so they were sitting straight and comfortable where they were before, and his ringing gradually went down and down and down and down, and it's now practically at zero. In fact, he can hardly notice it at all. So he's constantly getting better. But the diagnosis he was given was he had a virus. Now, the virus symptoms were actually caused by the trapped nerve, because a lot of people don't realise that sometimes viral symptoms are actually a trapped nerve, and doctors don't know this either. So often I've had people come to me with viral symptoms and they feel really rough and fluey and coldy, and actually it's just a trapped nerve in their body somewhere. And I've released that, and within 24, 48 hours the fluey symptoms have completely disappeared. So it's really, really important to get the right diagnosis, because if he hadn't called me, he would still be suffering with that right now, because his neck would still be like this, and he'd still be walking around, the ringing would still be there, and he would have believed that that was correct. That was a really, really bad diagnosis. Another example is a lady that I actually talk about a lot, and it's a lady who had migraines and headaches, and she was told by a doctor that it was her age, and her physio didn't seem to be able to help either. And this again was a bad diagnosis. It's never ever your age. So the diagnosis is really, really important. Another quick example, I had a guy come to me who was a runner, and he was something to do with the army, but he wasn't like in the army. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he'd been around lots of army physios and therapists because he had a problem with his foot, and he was running and he couldn't run on his foot, and everyone had said, the doctors, the therapists said that, I think one person said it was arthritis, and they all said it was kind of the way he was running that was the problem, but in reality that wasn't actually the case. That wasn't what was happening. Yes, it was the way he was running, but that wasn't the thing that needed to be corrected. It wasn't the running that had caused it. It was the way he was running that had caused it. So what had happened was he'd knocked his bone out of his foot in the wrong place. He was running on the outside of his foot, and he was causing inflammation to build in his foot as he ran. And because of that, it hurt every time he ran. Now, as soon as we got the inflammation out, and I taught him to walk correctly, I then taught him to run correctly, his pain went down and he could run again. So it's really important to get the right diagnosis, because if you don't, then the therapy that follows is also going to be incorrect, and you're not going to get good treatment, and your pain is going to stay there. So I want you to understand, it's really important. You must get a good diagnosis. And the tragedy of all this is that most doctors are not good at diagnosing pain, because they look at your body like it's broken, they look at it like it's damaged, and they just look at it and go, they find out what's going on in the body and go, well, that's what's happening, so we can't do anything. You have to find out why that's going on in the body. You have to understand why whatever is happening, whether it's inflammation, whether it's a pulled tendon, a pulled muscle, whether it's arthritis, whatever it is, you have to understand why it's happening so you can solve it. And you do that by following my 3 causes of pain. And if you haven't seen my 3 causes of pain, you can look at my other videos, and they are labelled the 1st, 2nd and 3rd cause of pain. So check those out. I hope that makes sense and give you some examples of how a good diagnosis is really important. In the next video, I'm going to share with you how to know if your diagnosis is correct. So how can you tell if your diagnosis is correct? Because obviously you're not a doctor, you're not a therapist, you wouldn't know. So how can you tell if your diagnosis is correct? That's going to be the next video. Until then, stay healthy, stay happy, keep smiling, and I'll see you on the next video.